The trouble began the moment I moved into the quiet cul-de-sac of Willow Crest, a neighborhood with a shiny entrance sign, rows of manicured lawns, and an HOA board that acted like they were running a miniature country. For the first few weeks, everything felt normal. Neighbors waved from their porches, the air smelled like fresh-cut grass, and the HOA president, a woman who loved clipboards more than oxygen, welcomed me with the kind of smile that was way too bright to be real. I ignored the uneasy feeling and focused on settling into my new home. I had no idea the HOA would soon turn me into their community villain. It started small, tiny notices that seemed harmless at first. A warning about a trash bin being visible for 10 minutes past the approved time. A reminder about acceptable lawn aesthetics, even though my lawn had barely grown an inch. I took them lightly, thinking the HOA simply liked being strict. But soon the tone changed. The warnings became accusations. The accusations became fines. And the fines became threats about escalating my repeated violations to the board's disciplinary committee. What bothered me most wasn't the notices themselves but how confident the HOA seemed about issues I knew weren't happening. One morning, I stepped outside to find a bright orange envelope stuck to my door. It claimed I had left my porch light off for 3 nights straight, violating the evening safety illumination rule. But I knew my light, an automatic sensor light, never turned off. When I checked the footage on my newly installed security camera, the porch light was on every single night. That was the first moment I felt something was seriously wrong. Someone was either lying, or someone was tampering with things on purpose. Over the next 2 weeks, the HOA's claims grew stranger. They accused me of leaving tools scattered on my driveway when I was out of town. They sent a photo of a so-called overgrown hedge that belonged to a completely different house. They fined me for noise disturbances on mornings I had proof I wasn't even at home. It felt like I was being watched, or worse, targeted. Neighbors began whispering when I passed by. Some offered awkward smiles. Others refused to look at me. The HOA had successfully painted me as the community problem, and I didn't even know why. The turning point came after a particularly harsh letter, one claiming I had violated 7 rules in a single day. According to them, my dog barked for hours, my trash can was left open, lawn clippings were scattered across the sidewalk, and an unauthorized visitor parked in my driveway. I didn't have a dog, hadn't mowed my lawn that day, and the only visitor I had was a courier dropping a package. The HOA board demanded that I attend a disciplinary hearing, hinting that further action could lead to property restrictions and increased fines. Something inside me snapped. I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a targeted setup. Someone wanted me in trouble, and the HOA was either helping them or being manipulated by them. I needed proof, solid, undeniable proof that the accusations were fabricated. So I expanded my security system. More cameras. Better angles. Continuous recording. Every inch of my property was now monitored. If someone was messing with my home or staging violations, I would catch them. The first clue arrived sooner than I expected. At 2 a.m., my camera's motion sensor activated. The figure that appeared on the screen was hooded, moving cautiously along the edge of my house. They stopped at the trash bin, rummaged through it, and deliberately tipped it over before slipping into the shadows. 5 hours later, the HOA emailed me a violation notice claiming I had left the trash bin overturned overnight. My heart pounded as I watched the footage again. Someone had staged this. Someone wanted the HOA to believe I wasn't following rules. I printed the still images, organized the timestamps, and prepared a timeline. This was no longer just HOA harassment, this was sabotage. But the sabotage didn't stop there. A few nights later, the same figure came back, this time carrying a spray bottle and a small pouch. On camera, they sprayed my porch light, covering the sensor so it appeared broken. They sprinkled something on the driveway, litter or debris, something the HOA later called yard waste left unattended. Every action was methodical, as if the person knew exactly what the HOA monitored. What shocked me most was that the person didn't hide from my camera. They moved confidently, almost carelessly, as if they believed no one would ever check the footage. Or worse, as if they assumed I didn't have cameras at all. I started studying the footage frame by frame. The figure's walk, the shape of their shoulders, the hesitation before turning corners, it felt familiar. Too familiar. I realized the person lived nearby. Maybe even on my street. But I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I needed undeniable evidence before confronting anyone. The final straw happened 3 days before the HOA meeting. Another early morning alert. This time the figure wasn't alone. A second person held a clipboard, shining a flashlight at my porch, driveway, windows, and lawn. The first person staged the violations, while the second wrote things down, cross-checking something on their papers. That was the moment everything clicked: the clipboard, the flashlight, the late-night inspections. The second person was part of the HOA. Someone on the board was actively helping sabotage my property to manufacture violations. Outrage simmered in my chest, but the timing couldn't have been better. The HOA had scheduled my disciplinary hearing in 3 days, and they expected me to come alone, unprepared, and ready to accept their punishment. Instead, I would walk in with footage, clear recordings exposing exactly what had been happening. The HOA wanted a meeting. Fine. They were about to get a show. The morning of the HOA disciplinary hearing felt heavier than any day since I moved into Willow Crest. The air was oddly still, and the neighborhood seemed quieter than usual, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. I woke early, reviewed my evidence one last time, and packed everything neatly into a folder: timestamps, printed screenshots, and a USB stick containing the full recordings. Normally, HOA hearings were formalities meant to pressure homeowners into compliance. But today, I wasn't the one on trial. Today, the HOA was. As I walked toward the community center, the same neighbors who once avoided looking at me now peeked from behind curtains or paused mid-stride on the sidewalk. There was curiosity in their eyes, maybe even guilt. They had heard the rumors spread about me, rumors the HOA helped fuel, and now they were eager to see what would happen when the so-called biggest problem in the neighborhood faced the board. I ignored the stares and focused on what lay ahead. I reminded myself that the footage didn't just show the truth, it showed intent. It showed sabotage. And once the board saw it, things would never be the same. Inside the small meeting room, I was greeted by the stiff smell of dry carpet and cheap coffee. 3 board members sat behind a long table, the president with her immaculate posture, the treasurer already fidgeting with papers, and a new face I didn't recognize. A row of empty chairs lined the opposite wall, as if the board expected an audience but no one had shown up. The absence of spectators struck me as odd, considering how gossip spread like wildfire in this neighborhood. Maybe the HOA wanted this meeting quiet, controlled, away from prying eyes. The president began the session with the usual formalities, her tone polished and authoritative, as if she had already drafted the outcome. She laid out the accusations: property damage, improper maintenance, noise complaints, and a pattern of disregard for community rules. Each accusation was read with an air of certainty, as if none of it could possibly be questioned. The treasurer nodded at each point, barely looking up. To them, this seemed like a done deal. I could sense their confidence, until it was my turn. The moment I placed the folder on the table, the room's energy shifted. Their postures stiffened. Their eyes flicked to the USB drive, then back to me. Quiet tension spread through the air like cold fog. I started by addressing each allegation chronologically, laying out the timestamps and photos. At first, the board listened with passive politeness, their expressions unreadable. But everything changed the instant I described the first nightly intrusion caught by my cameras. When I pulled out the printed still image of the hooded figure tipping over my trash bin at 2 a.m., the treasurer froze, his fingers clenching around his pen. The president blinked rapidly, her carefully maintained composure flickering for the first time. The third board member leaned forward as if trying to see more clearly. But it was when I played the footage on my laptop, slow, silent, undeniable, that the room truly changed. The figure moved with practiced ease, staging violations with familiarity. And beside them, the second figure with the clipboard appeared, shining a flashlight and writing notes. A crack formed in the board's perfect armor. Fear wasn't visible yet, but discomfort was. They exchanged glances, subtle but strained. The president attempted to maintain control, insisting the footage was unverified, but even she sounded unsure. I presented the next clip, one showing the saboteur spraying my porch light, intentionally disabling the sensor that triggered one of the HOA's most expensive fines. Then another clip of debris being scattered intentionally onto my driveway. Then another of the figures whispering to each other before hurrying off into the dark. The footage didn't just expose wrongdoing. It exposed coordination. And more. Importantly, it exposed familiarity between the two people involved. The treasurer swallowed hard. The third board member leaned back, arms crossed, now studying the president instead of the evidence. Something was unraveling, and they all knew it. But there was one moment in the footage that mattered more than anything else, the instant one of the hooded figures turned slightly toward the camera, revealing the shape of their jacket, an HOA jacket, the same one worn exclusively by board members during official inspections. It wasn't a perfect identification, but it was enough. Enough to raise suspicion. Enough to shift blame. Enough to make the board realize they couldn't dismiss me as the problem anymore. Silence smothered the room after the final clip ended. The president tried to recover, hiding her trembling by rearranging papers. She insisted the board would investigate, but her tone lacked conviction. The treasurer quietly gathered his folders, avoiding eye contact. The third board member asked to view the footage again. That request alone signaled a turning point. When the meeting finally ended, the president declared they would temporarily suspend all fines until a review was completed. It wasn't an apology, but it was the first step back. Outside the community center, the whispers began. Neighbors who had pretended not to see me yesterday now lingered openly, wanting details. The truth spread faster than the lies ever had. And with every retelling, suspicion shifted away from me, and toward the HOA itself. Over the next 2 days, the neighborhood fell into an uneasy quiet. The board held emergency meetings behind closed doors, refusing to speak to homeowners. The president stopped her usual daily walks. Even the treasurer's car disappeared from his driveway for long stretches of time. Something was happening within the HOA, something they were trying desperately to contain. But I wasn't done. The footage had revealed only part of the truth. I needed to know who the saboteurs were and why I had been targeted in the first place. So I returned to the recordings, studying each frame again. I slowed the videos, enhanced shadows, compared silhouettes. And then, in one blurry angle I had overlooked, I caught something, a detail small enough to miss at first glance but significant enough to change everything. A bracelet. A thin, silver bracelet worn by one of the saboteurs. The same kind I had seen the HOA president wearing at every meeting. My stomach tightened. The possibility I had suspected from the beginning now took shape. She wasn't just covering something up. She might have been directly involved. But before I could investigate further, something unexpected happened. A note appeared on my doorstep the next morning. No envelope. No signature. Just 7 words written in hurried handwriting. Stop digging. You don't know the truth. And suddenly, the real danger began. The note on my doorstep changed everything. Up until that moment, I believed the HOA's attacks were driven by petty control, personal bias, or simple abuse of authority. But those 7 words, written hastily, slanted, almost desperate, hinted at something deeper. Someone didn't want me uncovering the truth not because they feared embarrassment, but because they feared exposure. Real exposure. That morning, the neighborhood felt different. Too still. Too watchful. The HOA president's house had its curtains closed for the first time since I'd moved in. The treasurer's car was still gone. And the third board member, the one who had looked uneasy during the hearing, now stood outside his driveway longer than necessary, his eyes drifting toward my home before quickly darting away. Something was cracking inside the HOA, something they were scrambling to patch. I spent the first half of the day reviewing my footage again, focusing on the small detail I had missed before, the bracelet on the wrist of one of the saboteurs. The silver band had a distinctive twist, identical to the one the president wore at every meeting. But the video still didn't show their face. It wasn't enough on its own. I needed certainty, clear evidence, not just suspicion. So I turned my attention to something I hadn't reviewed yet, the audio. Although my cameras focused on video, they captured faint ambient sound if someone spoke close enough. The early clips were silent, the figures communicated only through gestures. But the last night, the night the saboteur came twice, had a 2-second whisper buried in the background. I isolated the audio and increased the gain. What emerged was a hushed sentence, rushed and impatient. The voice wasn't perfectly clear, but its cadence was unmistakable. I had heard it before, dozens of times, reciting rules, issuing warnings, lecturing the neighborhood on order. It was the HOA president. With that confirmation, the entire story began to form. The sabotage. The staged violations. The desperation in the note. This wasn't random harassment. This was coordinated, purposeful, led by the person who was supposed to protect the neighborhood's order. But why target me? The answer began revealing itself when I studied a detail I had previously ignored, the clipboard carried by the second saboteur. When they turned, just for a moment, the camera caught the top corner of a document clipped to the board. The logo wasn't the HOA's. It belonged to a contracting company I had never heard of. That single detail pointed to a motive I hadn't considered. I checked my records, the HOA newsletters, and their meeting minutes. The president had been pushing for a new, safety renovation initiative, a massive project involving new streetlights, gate upgrades, and surveillance equipment. The cost was enormous, and homeowners were resisting. But if the neighborhood began experiencing serious safety issues or rule-breaking incidents, she could justify pushing it through. By turning me into the community's problem, she created proof that the neighborhood was declining. Her staged violations weren't about me. They were about building a case. I wasn't the target. I was the tool. Armed with this new understanding, I prepared a complete report. Every clip, every still, every timestamp, audio analysis, and supporting documents. It was time to release the truth, not to the HOA, but to the entire community. If the president wanted to use me to justify her agenda, then exposing her motives would collapse the entire plan. The next morning, I distributed the report anonymously. Every homeowner received a copy. Every mailbox. Every porch. Every door. Within an hour, the neighborhood erupted. People gathered in clusters on the sidewalks, flipping through pages in disbelief. Some were angry. Some were shocked. And some, especially those who had once avoided me, looked guilty as they read the truth. The footage of the HOA president sneaking around at 2 a.m. The staged violations. The audio whisper. The proposal for the costly renovation project she was quietly pushing forward. It was all there, laid bare. And as expected, chaos followed. The HOA president emerged from her house 30 minutes later, visibly shaken, clutching her phone. Neighbors confronted her immediately, waving the report in her face. For the first time, she didn't have a calm smile or a confident clipboard stance. She was cornered, scrambling for explanations. Her polished composure was gone. Before noon, the treasurer returned to the neighborhood. He looked exhausted, ashamed, and startled at the storm unfolding. Rumors quickly spread that he had confronted the president privately days earlier, suspecting something was off. The third board member, realizing the conspiracy could ruin him as well, publicly demanded an emergency HOA election. That evening, the entire board was suspended pending investigation. The president resigned before the vote was even held. And the treasurer, who admitted he had been manipulated into signing off on several routine violations, stepped down voluntarily. But the fallout didn't end there. Residents formed a temporary committee to review the HOA's past actions. They uncovered inconsistencies in other homeowners' violation records, suspicious approvals, and attempts to redirect community funds. The president's renovation initiative was exposed as a partnership with the same contracting company whose logo appeared on the saboteur's clipboard. The connection was undeniable. The community voted unanimously to dissolve the old board and elect an entirely new one. For the first time since moving into Willow Crest, the neighborhood felt lighter. People apologized to me, offered help, and thanked me for exposing everything. I didn't crave the attention, but I accepted their gratitude. After weeks of being painted as the neighborhood menace, the shift felt surreal. But the moment that stayed with me came on the final day of the investigation. A sealed envelope was left on my doorstep. No signature. No message. Just a USB drive inside. When I plugged it in, I found one video file, unedited, high quality, and shot from a different angle than any of my cameras. It showed the president and the contractor's representative discussing their plan, confirming everything I suspected. The file ended with one final message typed on a blank screen. I couldn't speak up before. But you deserve the truth. I never learned who sent it. Maybe a board member. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe someone inside the contractor's company. It didn't matter. Justice had already unfolded. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood returned to normal. Lawns were still trimmed, rules still existed, and life continued. But the oppressive weight that once lingered over Willow Crest had lifted. People were kinder. More cautious of blind trust. More aware of the power their HOA held. As for me, the resident once labeled the biggest problem, I became something else entirely. The one who revealed the truth. The one who recorded everything. The one they couldn't silence. And the one the HOA would never underestimate again.